Okay, so this is really funny, but I had a little bit of help with a macro photo set that I was working on the other day. And with it, I was thinking about, you know what? I have a really good technique for this that I should really share with you guys. Now, if you saw the last video, one of the things we talked about was depth of field or margin of focus, that idea that portions of your image will be completely in focus, partially in focus, or completely out of focus, depending on how that photo is taken and all of the settings that go into it. Well, if you take that into macro, then you have the same problem, but even more so. Typically, because macro is about taking a detail, a small subject, and making it larger than life in a lot of the ways to give it to your viewer to really exemplify something. And realistically, what this means is that you have shorter distances between the lens and the subject to give you the macro, which then doesn't allow for a whole lot of light. They're magnifying these typical subjects. These lenses come in specific apertures and focal lengths, and all of that comes together to make it even harder to make a good macro shot. But this week, I want to give you a technique to really help you give more emphasis, to give a little more focus depth to a specific subject. And to do that, we're going to talk about a focus stack. But first, you got to know what a focus stack is, and really, you got to know what a composite is. So let's talk about it really quick. So realistically, you have a front point and a back point, point A to point B. When it comes to focus, points that are in focus completely is A to B. And what that means is that point is what you want to adjust in every photo. So inevitably, what you have is the difference between a focus point, which is in the front, and then you take the next photo and you move it up a little bit more. You take the next photo and you move it up a little bit more. And inevitably, the difference is only focus in the whole set. And we're going to take all of them together to make our final photo. And that's kind of the point. That's what we're doing. Now, again, this is not super easy because it is manually touching the camera. And if you introduce any sort of camera shake, you're going to know about it on the back end. Or if you adjust the camera and it's off center or off kilter, whatever you want to say, you're going to know about it, especially on the back end. And in order to do this, the first thing that I like to do is set the actual camera on a tripod. I want to make sure I lock it off. That way I don't have any sort of movement just by hand holding. Beyond that, the next thing I do is I actually remove the autofocus so that way I can manually adjust focus as I need to through the actual set. Beyond that, really, it's just taking the same photo a bunch of times, with the only difference being that I'm going to move my actual focus point a little bit forward as I go through the subject. So I take the photo at point A, and then I move it a little bit further, and then I move it a little bit further in the next photo, and another little bit further in the next photo until I get through the actual set. And then lastly, the most important thing, in my opinion, besides the tripod, is using something like focus peaking. Focus peaking is essentially just a camera setting that you can turn on in digital cameras that will actually show you the plane of focus, that focus range in your image, and it'll show you visually with a color. Now you don't only have to like guess at kind of what is perfectly in focus versus what is completely out of focus. You can actually see the differences. So you can see what is completely in focus based on that setting, and you can see what is partially out of focus, and then you can see what is completely out of focus. And that inevitably will give you all the tools that I personally would use to give you a better macro. Now, the other way to do this is completely in camera automatically. If your camera has something like focus stacking as a feature inside the menus, this will help you out because it's going to do all of that series on its own. Essentially, what you will do is choose how many photos in that series, and then you will also choose the first focus point. You're basically going to tell it where the subject is, and then the camera's going to do the rest. It's going to take the entire series for you. So that way you don't introduce camera shake, you don't have to choose all the focus points, you don't have to move the manual focus, all of that kind of stuff. The first thing that I do is I take my entire series of images, all of the photos, and I move them straight into Lightroom. From there, I do a single edit on a single photo while it's still a raw format. Realistically, I don't think that there's a problem if you do it on the back end on a TIFF potentially. You just lose a little bit of latitude. But realistically, for me, I just like to do it at the beginning because I like to see an edited image. So from there, I take my single edited image and I make sure not to forget to apply that to all of the images because, again, we want a single image and we want all of these series of images to be the exact same when it goes into creating that composite. So, again, I take them out of the camera, I put them into Lightroom, and I make sure that the series all looks the same, even if I edit one of the photos. Afterwards, I move it from Lightroom into Photoshop, where I do two simple things. The first is an auto alignment. Realistically, one of the things that people will forget in this, or don't do, or forget to do, is an auto alignment because even all of these photos to the naked eye probably look very, very similar, even if you did the auto portion. And realistically, Photoshop is really great at about aligning the photos to making sure that all of them line up perfectly. After that, it's about blending the photos. So once they're all the layers are aligned, we blend them together to create the composite. So really we have a couple of click throughs. We go from aligning the photos to blending the photos, and then from there, it's going to create that composite. Again, the biggest thing here is to do this in this order because it'll help you out. But beyond that, just remember that it's going to take a little bit of time. If you set it to do 100 photos, and you're going to move 100 photos into Lightroom and from Lightroom into Photoshop, and from Photoshop you're going to do an alignment and blend on 100 photos, depending on your computer, depending on the specs, it's going to take some time. So just remember, not always is 100 or 200 or whatever, however many photos you can take is always the best thing. Just remember that typically you want more than what you kind of expect. That way you have enough to work with, and it's only going to use a little bit of each photo, but don't go overboard because it's just probably not super worth it. But again, once you get to the final part, this is where you're going to see your actual composite. And what's great about this is that you will then get to see how good of a job you did or the camera did in the end. Inevitably, this is the part where you're actually going to see some sort of problem if there was one, because you will probably see a little bit of a funky, maybe AI kind of blend mode in the composite where it didn't have enough information. So keep that in mind. But realistically, this is the part of the process where you get to see the final image. And hopefully, you take an image which originally probably looked something like this and instead get a grand image that looks a little bit something like this. Okay. So hopefully, this helps you out. Hopefully, if you haven't already, you will check this stuff out and make sure to implement it in the next time that you're into or thinking about doing some product photos or really anything in general that has to do with macros. If you're going to throw macros in there, like I said, sometimes it makes sense to do the one offs because you can really highlight a very small kind of area of the photo and kind of leave things to be desired. And if that's your goal, I think you can do that. However, if you're on the opposite side, you have a product and you want to really exemplify a feeling, if you really want to show off a feature, that really thin margin doesn't really help you sometimes. So you want to make sure that you get it totally in focus. And this is just one way to do it. Hopefully, this helps you out. Like I said, hopefully, you will check this one out. Hopefully, maybe you'll check out the last one too, because it'll kind of give you a little bit more of examples into depth of field. But beyond all of that, I just want to say thank you so much for checking this one out. And I will see you next time in the next one. And just remember, I have something coming down the pipe very soon. And I probably will be, to some degree, maybe, hopefully, showing it off in some feature video or future video very, very soon. That's all I can say. I just want to show you uh, what's going on. But inevitably, thank you so much for checking this one out. And I will see you guys, as always, as per usual, in the next one. Peace.